I'm live on the Skulls and Knives
podcast. We are actually.
Whoopsie daisy.
Oh, you're fine. What are you guys up to?
Just
hanging out.
We were watching American Idol, watching all of our favorites do bad and all the ones we don't like do good. And
that's not true.
That's not true. Well, you know you're old when you look forward to watching American Idol.
Yeah, right?
I just spit on my sweatshirt.
Why'd you spit on your sweatshirt?
Because your dad made me laugh when he said that. I was taking a drink and then I spit.
Oh. So what you drinking?
I'm drinking some scotch.
As always.
From a distillery called Brookelatte, which is really nice. It's an Islay scotch, so it's a little smoky.
That's what you were smoking or drinking last time, I think.
I believe that is true. It's become one of my favorites. Yeah, it's really good.
Did you get another bottle, or is it just the same bottle?
Oh, no, I got another bottle.
Sick. Yeah, I have oak leaf Moscato.
Oh, Moscato wine.
Moscato?
You drinking it straight from the bottle?
What are you, bougie now?
Oh, my God. No, he's not bougie. He's drinking it from the bottle.
That's my bottle now. How you guys been holding up with this whole coronavirus shit?
Doing all right. You know,
we took a truckload to Goodwill today.
Oh, Goodwill's open?
Yeah.
Yeah, I called ahead of time because I was worried.
Because we can't do anything or go anywhere, so everyone's cleaning out stuff.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was a little surprised, I guess, myself. So. But hey, I'm not going to argue. I got rid of a bunch of junk out of
the car and a car that Hunter, my sister-in-law, everyone listening, she gave me like her old really beater up car.
Oh, really?
Yeah, which was pretty cool.
Wait,
yeah.
What happened?
She bought a Toyota Camry or Corolla, but it's like an early 90s one. It's like you need to jump it every time you want to go somewhere. But well, I mean, as long as you're driving it frequently, you don't need to jump it. But I haven't been driving it, so because she gave it to me like right before all this stuff happened, and I was like, I'm not gonna pay, $10 in parking every single day just to drive the car here. Like, I'd rather just spend $5 on the bus. Like, it's half the price. Both of those out. And then we vacuumed the car and stuff, and it really needed. Then yeah, I've just been doing some cleaning at home and working out and making these masks and shit.
How's that going with the masks?
It's harder than I thought it would be.
Why?
Well, it's just that constructing everything. So what I was doing was I was like constructing each one at a time. So I was cutting out some different fabrics for different things, different parts of the mask, and then from there sewing every single one fully.
Okay.
Rather than, so I mean, it would take me like 2 hours to get through, 3 of them, and so I was just like, holy shit, man. Like, I can't just keep doing this. So what I did was I cut 15 of them up with all of the components together. So like the elastic band and the wire for the nose and everything else. And then I've been just doing one sew and then on every single one.
Gotcha.
And then another sew. And so I know that it's going to take a little bit longer doing it that way in theory, but on the last day I'll have 15 masks rather than, 3 on this day, and
Right.
another 2 if I get a chance on that day. So,
well, Henry Ford came up with the what's the word I'm looking for?
Don't ask me.
Conveyor belt.
No, the
car.
No,
the Ford.
Ford did invent the Ford. She's not wrong.
Thank you.
Assembly line. That's the
yes, assembly line.
I mean, that's what I was going to say next.
Yeah, so I've just been doing that.
When he was building Fords.
Conveyor belt, and people stand on it and put one part on, and then it moves down the line, and then the next guy puts another part on, and the next guy puts another part on.
I know what assembly line is. I have children.
What does that mean?
That means we had assembly lines.
Oh, for assembly?
Right.
Like at school?
I'll tell you about it later.
I think you're telling a joke and it's going over my head. Anyways, so I guess we should probably start this thing.
Yeah.
Well, first of all, guys, welcome to the Skulls and Knives podcast. You're 7.5 minutes in. Today I have my dad on for episode 3 of Fuck You, Dad. And we are going some policies and the differences between them and see which one, basically try and convince the other one of the other one's argument. So we decided that we'd start out with 5 minutes given to each of us to kind of like a total of 5 minutes to give a quote unquote opening statement, kind of like, doesn't have to be superficial. I did write part of what I was going to say down, but it also doesn't have to go exactly 5 minutes. Like, it's just designate 5 minutes to the other one to shut up and let the other one talk. And then we'll switch over. The other person will do that. And then, we'll start the conversation then once we kind of know.
While Caleb's gone, I'm taking over the Skulls and Knives podcast. Just so you know, Caleb used to pee the bed.
I did. Or are you sure that's used to?
You got over that. You got over that last year. Right?
Yeah, last year. I figured it out.
Technically, it's
So, anyways, what I went over there was for a coin. It's a penny. So, I'm not going to cheat. I have no skin in the game to cheat. But a penny, heads, tails. And I figured we'd just do heads or tails to see who goes first. I'll let you call it.
All right. Tell me when you flip it. We'll go with tails.
Okay, I'm going to flip. And it's heads.
It's heads.
I promise. I'm not going to move the camera because it's really annoying to get it back in this place. But it was heads. Has the right to life, liberty, and to have their voice heard equally, aka life, pursuit, happiness, all that shit. Their rights need to be protected via a large, people-owned, people-run government. This starts with large federalized governments like the U.S. or the UN, and will grow larger as countries choose to join the Federation. With AI on the horizon, robots and programs replacing workers already. And sorry, I am losing my mind. I should have read this through some more. With AI on the horizon, robots and programs replacing workers as Democratic-Communism to continue on a forward path. So I think that was like a minute and a half. I'll just say I started at 10. So anyways, I wanted to explain how some keynotes real quick. First of all, the system would look similar to a communist top-down structure, except rather than having the Communist Party be at the top of this structure, you would have the citizens of, currently right now, it would be the citizens of the United States or the Federation or the world eventually. These people will be able to directly vote in a president who would act as a figurehead They would get to vote in a third of his cabinet. And then from that, we would also be able to directly, under direct democracy, vote in medical, etc. All of these you basically break down most of the government into segments and people who run them, kind of how we do now, except rather than picked by a president or the president's cabinet, it's actually picked by the people. Something that's publicly distributed with the people voting on each piece of legislation, and possible quote unquote checks, meaning questioning whether something is constitutional or not, could be submitted to the judicial branch to check constitutionality by either the people, the cabinet, or other administration heads. Separate from this system, you would have the story of that single file. I think that it's important that the judicial branch stay separate. The people would be able to vote in, pick from the local judge pool of people becoming judges and applying to move up, and then the people of each state. From there, your Supreme Court would be rotation. Your federal Supreme Court would be rotational, with who's going to be in the Supreme Court, randomly selected based off of all the people that are in charge of the state Supreme Courts, or how this structure would be, union sector courts. That way you have no judges that would be tied to political parties. That way no one would be forced to side with their side, because you're not going to be able to have any sort of party system power in the judicial system. Sorry, real quick, I'm almost out of time. Keynotes. Number one, you divided. This includes healthcare, energy sector, housing, water, sewer, garbage, education, and food. Socialize all raw material production and energy production, meaning oil, gas, logging, mining, solar, wind, nuclear power, etc., would all be publicly owned. All proceeds made by the government-owned sectors will be distributed evenly to all citizens. So anything they make off taxes or selling the natural resources to other countries, etc., that stuff will be put together and distributed to the people equally. First and Second Amendment rights fully supported and backed. Roll back the military and focus on defense. And that would also include having all U.S. territories vote whether or not to become one with the United States citizens or go on about their own thing. This also means putting plans in place for pulling out of all foreign conflict and then voting whether or not we need to go back into them. That's kind of the general basis. I'm over time. Anyways, go.
All right. So I don't have quite the statement here. That in general, what I believe is that each individual should have and does have, and we must hold sacred, the liberty that each individual person has. And that word liberty, I guess, can be construed in many different ways. And it was interesting listening to some of the things you said, because I think some of the concepts are good, but maybe the way going about them might be one of the differing points. So as a libertarian, or I'm actually an independent who leans to the libertarian side. So what I would say is that my strongest personal belief is about personal liberty. And in that, I would say that I don't believe that really anyone should have the ability or the right to tell another person what they can and can't do with their own speech, their own freedom, their own body, all of those kinds of things. And so that's one of the reasons why the Libertarian Party is interesting to me, because that provides for the safety and security of the people, but also never infringes on the rights of the individual. So one of the things that I guess I would say we need to be really thoughtful about in whatever form of government we're putting together is the idea that the individual, the rights of the individual, the liberty of the individual should be at the forefront of our thoughts. And as such, you take that one of two ways. In your thought process, you take that similar idea. In my estimation, that's literally just asking for more totalitarian and authoritarian governmental systems. And so I say, nope, let's back these all off and let each individual stand on his own than anyone else. And a governmental system that wants to do that is problematic for me. But I do believe that the rights of the individual, the liberty of the individual, have to be guarded above all else. Because what we find and what you see in throughout history is that when we set aside the individual rights of the person, that we have tyranny. Tyranny begets tyranny, begets tyranny, begets tyranny. It just it's a never-ending cycle that just continues. Is the most important thing to guard above all else, whether it be as Americans or citizens of the world. So I guess with that, I will close.
All right. So let's see. Well, I got to go first in my intro. So why don't you go first and hit me with a question?
Well, I guess one of the questions I have when you're talking is, how do you guard against, in a system like you're talking about, how do you guard against this government becoming a totalitarian or authoritarian or even a dictatorship when you have this overarching government that controls all things?
So part of what this system of putting the people at the top of being at the bottom of this said pyramid, rather than, which is in most government systems now, putting them at the top and able to check and be the check and balance and actually have their own voice. Because of that, everyone in the government is subservient to whatever the people want. So there's that government side of it, like saying, for instance, guarding against a particular party gaining too much control by, all the loopholes we have now, gerrymandering, etc., or bringing about policies that would keep them in power, like you see with Putin and the single party system that they have there, where he just added another 25 years or whatever it was to how long he can be president. How you guard against that is that you have a re-election every certain number of years. So let's say it's every 4 years, right? And you have that written down in a way in the Constitution that, like, you can't reprehensible. It's not a gray area. It's like, nope, this is what happens when you try and do something like that. It's considered a coup. So let's go. Another thing, like I said, is having or actually I didn't specify this. So let's say, like I mentioned, like we have now, election every 4 years. For the president, you can only do 2 terms. Eliminate doing 2 terms. You can have 1. That's it. On top of that, your pay is the median wage of the people. Everyone that's voted into Congress, your pay, and not, greedy, power-hungry people, because there's no financial gain. There's no way for them to just hang around and be a super long career politician. The only way to stay in politics would be to work with. And so those are some of the things that I've tried to build into this to safeguard against that.
Okay.
How would
So,
Go ahead.
I was just going to ask. So, can I ask a follow-up question?
Yeah, please.
So, in your thought process, so there's a person in power. They decide at some point that they want to remain in power, so they enact what we're calling a coup or what have you. And then the government or then the military comes in and says, "Hey, this isn't going to work. You need to get out of here. We're going to enforce this with tanks, et cetera, whatever the deciding that it's going to maintain power until it decides that everything's A-okay again."
Yeah, and I don't know exactly. I'm still kind of working through all this, but
and that's okay. I'm just curious.
But like just thinking off the top of my head, I don't know, maybe you set it up where, well, the only reason that I worry about, because I thought about like taking the military and almost making it its own section of the government as well, enact a coup, and they'd be the only branch with any sort of leverage or power. And so, for instance, that's why, which I didn't mention, but written down, I have that underneath the judicial branch is where the police force of the police of the United States would be under their charge. And so that way you don't have the president, etc., being the only one with any type of force. So
Right.
Although they would technically be in charge of the military, they also have to pass everything that they do down through their cabinet, which I have written down here too. I have too many things written down here, to be honest. But I written down here that the cabinet of the president, the people directly advising him, would be a third chosen by the president, a third voted in by direct democracy, and a third voted in by the department heads that were voted in by the energy sector. Yeah, we need that guy up there right now. And then that way the president can have his own political advisors, etc., in there, along with the people that the people want in there advising the president, along with the people that actually run everything and work down channel to actually make the laws, etc., that get voted on by the people, also have someone up there on their end. And so, so all these things are just all attempts to be checked and balanced against something like that happen. Again, this system is designed like any party's welcome. You know what I mean? Like you have full on national elections. You don't have like, oh, do you have enough rules? So, you don't have every single Joe Schmo and, dumb fuck just putting their name on there. But you have some sort of rules in place.
This is for the people, Caleb.
Anyways, but yeah, so there'll be some type of rules worked out eventually. Again, this is like a grand general scheme of things. But yeah, I guess did I answer your question?
Yeah, I think so. I don't know that I don't know that it would be sufficient for me. The interesting thing that I guess I would say is that both of our points of view really are aimed at protecting the people from the government, allowing its rightful place or proper place.
Yeah, it like I think it's just two exact opposite ways of making it do that. And that's why I enjoy these conversations so much. And I like really wanted to expand on these two differing ideas. It's just like it's pro freedom. It's just how do you get to that?
Right.
And so
I guess one of the things that's interesting to me is so from a libertarian perspective, or I'll use the term loosely here. Okay, so I won't have to continually qualify it over and over again, because one of the things I think that we have lost over anybody, take your pick, the individual's ability and right to govern him or herself the way that we feel is best, right? So let's throw some things out there. We take smoking, for instance. So I think we may have talked about this before, but I just want to, I'll use smoking as a easy, low hanging fruit. We say, hey, the public health sector needs to. We're spending a lot of money taking care of people who smoke and who have lung cancer and who this and that. And so we need to tell everybody to stop smoking. So we limit smoking by the government. The government comes in and adjusts laws to limit the ability to smoke where you want, when you want, how you want, and those kinds of things. And people were saving lives and secondhand smoke and all that. And I totally understand all of that. But my problem is that as a principle, I firmly believe that if a person wants to smoke cigarettes and they end up getting cancer and they die, that's their problem. And that's their choice. And the government shouldn't be making those decisions for them. And if a private business owner who owns a piece of property and puts a business on it says, I don't want smoking in my restaurant, that's perfectly fine. Because he's a private owner, an individual who owns a business who decides on what the parameters of service are going to be for his business. But should the government say that you can't have a restaurant that's full of smokers? In my opinion, the answer is no. If I wanted to say, hey, all the smokers in Arizona, come visit me, because I'm going to let you smoke like chimneys in here, and we'll serve you, all the food you need and want, that should be my choice as a business owner. But, cities and counties and states decide as graded. And so when you talk about having a government that is of the people and for the people and all of that, it sounds great. But then you start talking about having this nationwide conglomerate where everybody votes on everything. And if you end up with 51% to 50% that nobody wants to smoke, or that we're outlawing smoking, then all of a sudden nobody can smoke. And, I don't smoke cigarettes, so I don't personally care. Mm-hmm. But I want to defend the rights of a person to smoke if they want to. Mm-hmm. They should be able to smoke in their house and smoke in their property. And, as far as I'm concerned, I don't care. And the same thing goes for, the use of most recreational drugs. Do what you want in your house. I don't care. You're not bothering me. Now, if you infringe upon my rights as a property owner by, jumping my fence to steal my stuff and sell it so you can get more cocaine, well, then now you've infringed upon my rights, and that's a problem. But within my the difference comes because in a libertarian mindset, it's scaling back government to allow individuals to stand on their own, to limit government so that they can't force you to pay taxes for things, and this is where maybe I differ from libertarians a little bit, but the libertarian mindset is that taxation is theft, basically. You're taking money from it into dicey territory. So every time I have a conversation like this, I always want to check it with the idea of individual freedom. And like I said, smoking's an easy one to talk about, but if you talk about heavier hitting topics like abortion.
Yeah. And so I think a big thing that's different with this style of socialism, and I will say, well, specifically this style is very, very people forward with this. And I would hope so, because I agree on I would say the smaller personal liberty idea, right? So like, for instance, like you said, smoking. I would even put abortion under that, personally, where it's like, it's a personal liberties thing. It's up to you.
Yep.
So, the problem is that once you get into stuff where, at least for me, like I care about is healthcare. It's like how does scaling back the guarantees and rights that you let's say, all right, so there is no right in America that I can walk into a hospital and get seen. Okay, it's entirely up to the hospital. Could refuse me if they wanted to. It all depends on like my insurance and what can I afford. A lot of the things we're talking about so far in my mind are kind of small potatoes, and that might be kind of why that this mind, the rights and liberties of these people, and how do you determine what is a right or liberty? Do you still have some sort of government that's planned out and is still in control of some things? And then on top of that, how do you protect against that government becoming corrupt and getting more and more power?
Right.
That's I don't know. That's the biggest concern for me about the libertarian idea. I'm all for personal liberties. I think that when you rewrite the Constitution to do what I'm talking about, you include a lot of the right to live and actually have an equal chance in the world to live and have a good life, rather than just, from a libertarian standpoint, from what I understand, is kind of like, hey, it's up to you, figure it out. And to me, that doesn't sound like, oh yeah, freedom of mobility. That just sounds like a middle finger to me. It's like, hey, screw you, you can figure it out for yourself. And I know some people are like, hey, that's the point. But to me, it's like, okay, I used this example on the last pod. I grew up in, some shit side of LA, right? Where, let's say I am of a minority. I went to a school that was horrible and I did horrible in school. I'm surrounded by drugs. I was surrounded by, do not have the same social mobility, and the, they don't have the same ability as me as a white kid who grew up middle class does, and so, like, I didn't have to. I'm more concerned about making sure that people can get those things and actually be able to move up in society and be able to live, and ensuring that, rather than saying, hey, it's up to you, figure it out.
Well, you said something interesting there that I maybe we can come back to, but I guess so first off, let me say, one of the things that I struggle with a lot when I think about politics is the idea, or the idealism versus the reality, right?
Mm-hmm.
So in an ideal world, I think libertarianism, or some form of it, is very much the most honest way to go about governing a society. And I feel like that because I feel like, that the individual is so important, and we can't lose sight of the individual. And that's the difficulty we run into, because when we set it for a society where we're not able to choose what we want to do with and didn't have a great life, or out in the sticks in the middle of nowhere in some trailer, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it doesn't matter color of your skin. It matters more about circumstance. And so, and I'll caveat that with saying that there is a definite racial factor to a lot of people who never did anything or made it anywhere. It's easier, or it's more difficult to get out of that, and I will agree with that 100%. But one of the things you said in your comment was to give people the chance to get out of that and to move up in society. I think move up was the term you used.
Mm-hmm.
And so the question, not the question, but the concern that I think a lot of people have, and that the question that I have to ask is, if in a society where all things are equal and everybody has the same whatevers, right? The same, we all go to the same school, we all learn the same thing, we all listen to the same teaching, we all whatever have the same healthcare, et cetera, what's the point in moving up? Why move up? What's the impetus to get better, to be different, or to challenge ourselves, or to stand out? And so in that sense, that people love and that people want to buy, or I can step up and have a service that people pay me for, and I can move up, if you will, because what I have is so valuable. And if what I have is not valuable, I figure that out and I figure out a way to change that. And that's the balancing act, because some people there's always going to be those who, quote unquote, step up and make things happen and jump in and move up, if you will, and the entrepreneur types who are always going to be looking for opportunities to challenge themselves and to make more money and to better themselves. And then there will be people that are just happy to stay in the system if they're fine. And my concern with a communist or socialist style of government is that there is, because it smooths everything, yourself in a position where you can be a person connected to the powerful government, and then that opens its doors to corruption. So that's my concern with that type of system.
Yeah, so part of the thing that I probably should have explained in the opening argument, been a little more clear on, is that this style of government that I'm proposing here, although communist in structure, economic parameters. So, for instance, when I talk about education, what I literally mean is having state schools, community government funded, government run, so that everyone has the opportunity to go. So the kid in the inner city can go to that school if he chooses to go to that school, or he doesn't have to. However, you'd still be in that system allowed, your Yales and your Harvards, your private institutions would still be in place. The only thing that would change is essentially the state schools and community college, and some, I would say, some trade schools. To a broader range of people. And then also to implement government owned and run grocery stores, especially in places that are food deserts. And so these places where
Right.
that are food deserts, you'd have similar to the post office, a government option to go, okay, hey, we're going to open up one here because you don't have one here, to create competition, kind of thing. So then your privately owned grocery stores can move in and try and get in the market as well. But that would encourage a grocery store to come in there. If the government one's making all the money, why not try and get in there too? You just, by having a grocery store there, you up the general market of the place. It's your energy sector. You'd still be able to, open up your bar, have a chain of bars. You'd still have McDonald's. You'd still have these corporations that sell things that are non-essential to human, or non-essential to, I could say, quote unquote, essential for human life, or human existence and well-being is what I wrote down.
So how do you what's the word I'm looking for? regulate a governmental entity. So here's a good example, I guess. You have an area. You have an area that doesn't have, it's quote unquote a food desert.
Mm-hmm.
The government comes in and says, "Hey, this is a food desert. We're going to open up a store, and we're going to make this thing we're going to have groceries and stuff so people can come in. Blah blah blah." How do you keep that type of system from becoming corrupt? That's my concern with any kind of large government, is the corruption that comes with the ability to control and have that kind of power.
Well, I'd say the same thing about, and I think this is also a big difference between libertarians and socialists in this regard, is do you trust the government that's run by in my idea, a government actually run by the people, or do you trust a corporation that holds nothing more than a dollar sign as who you are? And so does the government come in and perform a service and open up a grocery store so that it can then make sure that these people have access to fresh fruits and vegetables, et cetera, et cetera? In my mind, that's A, better for the community, and B, less corruption than you would have right now, where companies are just avoiding those areas and being like, "Hey, screw you," and you're a poor area with a food desert that you can afford Big Macs, you can't afford fresh fruits or vegetables. Screw you. I don't want to take SNAP benefits or whatever. Or you can have a store that's like, yeah, everything you can. If you don't have food stamps, you buy it. If you have more opportunity, and in my mind, I trust a government entity that's actually ran and owned by the people than as a whole than some corporation just promising some corporation, "Hey, please come over here and help us."
So how does that governmental entity? So let's pretend for a second that we're in your world,
mm-hmm.
and the government decides, "Hey, this is a food desert. We need to come in and provide this service," and so they do, and then that entity is losing money for some reason.
Mm-hmm.
So at some point, does the government say, "Hey, this isn't worth the investment we're putting into it," or they just continue to say, "Hey, this is what's quote unquote right or good for the people, so we're going to keep going"?
I think that's something you'd have to balance out. I mean, it's similar to how, the post office, for instance, let's just go there, did take tax. I don't remember the exact year, but for a long time now, even though it's state owned, they haven't taken any money out of taxes. I forget how many years in a row it's been, but no, they haven't needed tax money because so many people use the post office. And in some places it's the only thing you can use, and therefore they are providing a service because you can send mail anywhere in the United States through them. But you also have the competition there to, also try and tap in, drive to Albertsons next town over. You can just come here. You can, hey, we got all the fruits and vegetables you need. I don't see why it wouldn't work if you're doing everything right. And then if you reevaluate certain stores and maybe move them to maybe different markets, maybe you were like, "Hey, we analyzed this area wrong, and actually, there's actually not as many people living here as we thought there was." And, I don't know. So I feel like that's something that the administrative sectors would have to figure out and decide.
Yeah,
and make those hard choices, because it's like,
right.
whether or not
the more you talk about it, the more I'm thinking like, okay, so what government official is going to say, hey, we had this store for the last 10 years, but it doesn't make any money, and only 3 people show up a day, and blah, blah, blah. So we're going to shut it down. And then now you've got this national scandal or a regional scandal where this government official shut this thing down because, and so he or she is now starving out the people of this area. You see what I'm saying? Like,
yeah. And so
like
I would feel like the necessity for the food, no matter how many found, like still having
then you're gonna have complaints that the government store doesn't have
store in theory would be there for nutritional items in the first place. It's there to make people not starve, right?
Okay.
So it would be things, you wouldn't need Twinkies. If you want to go to Twinkies, go to the next fucking town over and get something that has zero nutritional value for you. This would all be based off of the scientific sector in charge of the scientific people working in foods on SNAP work and some don't. So like, I should say WIC is a little more stringent. It's a better example of what I'm talking about. So WIC, if I think but some people that might be listening don't know, it's essentially for new mothers. So
women, infants, and children.
Women, infants, and children. Thank you. WIC. That makes sense. And they're just basically the essentials to keep you alive and keep your baby healthy. So like, if you have WIC, you get a certain number of milks and a certain number of loaves of bread and a certain number of this thing and that thing. And so in a similar way, the SNAP benefit thing would work in a similar fashion to that, and that's how the government stores would be run. Is no, we don't have lollipop viewing nutrition. You might need some good meat and fruits and veggies and fresh fruits, and here's some pasta, whole wheat, here's some whole wheat breads and all natural breads, etc. And so here's a bunch of vegetables in cans and nice soups in cans that are below the sodium levels that are recommended, etc. That's what these stores are for. That would be the goal. The goal is not necessarily to be a full-on competitor to an Albertsons where I can go get an umbrella there.
Right. And I guess in a sense I can understand the desire or the desire to have some sort of governmental system or operation to keep people healthy and to provide them the basics of healthy nutrition. So the question I guess that would come about is, how do you do these things and then also balance the importance and in mind what they want, when they want, and how they want. And this is sort of the struggle for me.
Mm-hmm.
And let me back up for a second. So one of the things I recognize as a middle class or even upper middle class, if you want to argue that, individual in America today, I recognize, and I've had this conversation with several people, that I stand on the back or stand on the shoulders of several people that are very, very, I don't know what the right word is, very, very well put together. By that I mean, in a sense, like, so my dad, your grandfather, he's got his doctorate.
Mm-hmm.
Smart man. He's got a great life, a great retirement. He's definitely got himself taken care of for life, right?
Mm-hmm.
his dad was a small business owner. My mom, while she was a homemaker and a teacher, her mother was a homemaker, but her dad was an exec. Expected a certain level of existence and a certain level of life. And so I recognize that I stand on those shoulders. And so when I've talked to people about this in the past, I know that I come from a play and otherwise over the years. Now, recognizing that, I know that my perspective might be somewhat jaded or somewhat off kilter because I don't live in the projects. I don't live in the inner city. I haven't had to, quote unquote, pull myself up by my bootstraps. Now, there's been times when, sure shit, man, I was, paycheck to paycheck, and I was dollar to dollar, and there were times when we scraped together cash to go buy Top Ramen or to go buy chili so we could have chili dogs. It was like, we don't have cheese for our chili dogs. Oh, well, we're going to suffer because we can't scrape up enough except to buy. We relied on the help of our family. We relied on the help of the government. I mean, there were times when we had, WIC. That's why I know what it stands for, because we had WIC benefits, and this is years and years ago. But we were able to rely on that for the basics, and I think that's important and good. But I also don't trust government to look out for my best interest. And so while or Chandler, Arizona, and you look around and you're like, hey, I might be on the bottom third of this totem pole, but if you looked at my life compared to the life of a lot of other people in America, let alone the world, I mean, but America, and I totally understand how it's important for a society to look out for each other. The problem I really have when it all boils down to it is I don't trust the government, and I don't trust people who are in government. And I think most of those people are just out to line their own pockets in the end, and whether that be through their connection with multinational, international corporations, or even national corporations or organizations through politics, or whether that be through I'm going to get into this office and do my thing, and then I'm going to have all these speaking engagements and all these opportunities to, make myself more wealthy over the coming years, or whether it's a quest for power. I struggle with the idea that government is the answer. And I understand that it's scary to think that there's not somebody there making sure people don't take advantage of each other. But on the flip side, I sure as hell don't trust the government to figure it out. And so that's where my struggle becomes when we start talking about politics, we start talking about how government interacts with people. In an ideal world, government is of the people, by the people, for the people. But let's be real, like, we don't know shit about the people that we elect into office. So we don't know anything about these judges that we vote in year after year. We don't know anything about even our city council members. We don't know anything about them.
Yeah.
We see their poster, and we see that they say they're all for families, and they take a picture with their wife and four kids, and we go, hey, that's a good, solid citizen of my area. I'm going to vote for that person. We don't know anything about these people, and yet we trust them with our livelihoods. That's the thing that scares me.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like I feel the exact same way about corporations and businesses. And I think it's more of, I know for a fact that business, I'm not, even as a customer, I'm not their one and only priority. What you're after is not me individually. What you're after is the money I have in my pocket. And so for me, I don't trust corporations in a similar way as you don't trust government. Yeah, I mean, my biggest concern with libertarian thought is, how do you, in a libertarian society, how do you guarantee people's right for liberty, people's individual liberty? How do you guarantee that? Because, for instance, who do you pay for energy?
We pay SRP, Salt River Project.
Okay, and Salt River Project, is that owned by the state of Arizona still, or is that contracted out? I can't remember. One of them is...
So Salt River Project and Arizona Public Service are both APS. They're both...
As an SRP customer, do you have an option to go somewhere else?
No, not at all.
And so that is exactly my biggest concern, because regulations to keep themselves in track to actually deliver you power and not fuck with you and screw you over day in and day out. There's still, the only reason they can't do that is that there's a government entity doing that. You don't have an option to go somewhere else. And so that in Rook, I'll let you talk about just libertarian society, and everyone else is going to be under it. Right. All these companies that already own these sectors already run everything that's going on in these
sphere. But the flip side of that is a market where, okay, so APS isn't the semi-governmental entity that, even though it's a corporation and it's, governed by the Corporation Commission of Arizona, it's the only entity that supplies power to this part of the valley. Instead of that, I've got an entrepreneur that goes and finds funding and gets a bunch of investors together and creates a corporation, and then goes out and builds a solar farm or a wind farm, and they create energy, and then they can sell energy to me at a lower rate if they want. And now all of a sudden I've got companies, one's a wind farm, one's a solar farm, one's a hydroelectric farm from a new area, a new place, a new distribution, and all of a sudden now they're working, they're in competition, 2, 3, 4 entities all coming. So why don't you buy it from us instead? And then all of a sudden APS is going, oh, hey, hang on a second. Okay, well, we'll lower ours too. And so we're looking for you and I are looking, I think, for similar things in the end. We're just looking for different ways of doing it.
Yeah.
You're saying let's have government regulate and monitor these things and control these things. And the libertarian view and the way I lean is to say, hey, let's let people figure this shit out. Because if you deregulated some of this and you pulled the Corporation Commission out, the 100-year view of this thing and the 200-year view of this thing, all of a sudden you'd have, I live in Arizona. You're going to have solar farms up the ass. You're going to have people everywhere saying, hey, I can build this solar farm and I can sell this same power to you for cheaper if you want to go with me. And, Texas, I don't know a lot about it, so I'm kind of talking out of my ass, but you'll forgive me. Texas is a state that I believe is deregulated, and I only say that because I understand that people in Texas are able to buy their power from various different sources, and they can decide if I value renewable resources, so I'm not going to buy my power from this company that has a coal-fired generator. I'm going to buy my power from this company that has wind farms. Well, hey, all of a sudden, now the free market is dictating something that's good for the environment. And to me, that's a pretty good thing. Versus what I have now, from, taking me to town, is I've got this governmental entity that I have to rely on to, manage them. And that, to me, that's that kind of regulation just seems, on the face of it, it seems great, but in the long term, man, I think it's not beneficial for the overall long term success of what we could have. And going back to this idea of like free market, if every individual in my neighborhood would, I think my neighborhood, my housing development holds, I don't know what it is, it's 5,000 houses or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
If every one of us had the option to decide who we got our power from, well, shoot, you'd have people banging on our doors trying to get power of ourselves. And those are inflicted is not the right word, but self-chosen collaborations to work together in a free market society to get the best rate.
Mm-hmm.
So that's kind of where I'm coming from on it.
Yeah, and I see those things as all cool and great, but I also see them as that's best case scenario. The best case scenario is you can get everyone to agree to go to someplace that's cheaper, or only uses solar, et cetera, or what you can do without having to rely on everyone else to really fully intentionally agree on something. You can have the government take care of it and be like, hey, look, we're going to slowly switch to renewables for this and this and this. This is what you guys all voted on before. So everyone's going to be switching to this, et cetera. And then, I mean, I don't know about you, but like you were mentioning solar or whatever, like, hey, I can get to have another company come in. In theory, couldn't SRP just be like, hey, screw you. You can't. These are our lines. You have to go through and get enough people to let you run electricity from wherever the hell you're at all the way through. And like, it just seems like an almost impossible task, because SRP in theory could be like, oh no, you're not digging over our lines. Screw you. Like, who owns?
In my estimation, I mean, the idea that,
no, I'd agree on that, but
the idea that naive to me. I mean, you've got a lot of examples throughout history of how people get corrupted by the power,
mm-hmm.
governmental office. And you have a lot of examples throughout history of how people get corrupted by money and the free market society. So in my estimation, we're both talking about this, what we see as some sort of utopian society.
Mm-hmm.
And in truth, what we're going to ultimately come to, and this is one of the beautiful things about, I think, the beautiful things about America, is we have the opportunity to talk about these things openly, to debate them openly, and then to, if we want to, try to enact changes. But I think it's interesting to see the politicians. This is politicians in general. And I just don't see a lot of people that I want to put a lot of faith and trust in.
No, and I agree in that. That's why you would, at least in what I see, a lot of the gross corruption in is people able to sit in Senate seats and Congress seats for years and years and years and years and years on end. And I mean, you like about someone, right? For instance, for me, that's Bernie Sanders. It's like, yeah, he's a career politician, but the whole time he's been fighting, I should say, and are out the ass corrupt. And so I think the best way to deal with that is just to eliminate Congress, Senate, the majority of these career politicians, eliminate it. Eliminate them able to just sit in a seat forever.
Yeah, so I would.
So
I would argue,
so it would have. It would,
that.
Sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just gonna say I would argue that the term limits are super, super important.
I agree.
And one of the things that I would argue against very strongly is completely removing a representative form of government. I think it's important to have. So you talked a lot about direct democracy and technology, where you can kind of vote on this and vote on that. And I don't know, have you ever watched the show The Orville?
Nuh-uh.
Oh my, you got lots of time on your hands.
Oh yeah.
Shit. Okay, so you need to go on Hulu, and if you don't have Hulu,
I have Hulu.
Okay, awesome. Go on Hulu. I think it's on Hulu. And watch The Orville.
The Orville, like Orville Redenbacher?
Yes, like Orville Redenbacher. So the Orville is, oh man, I'm totally blanking on the guy's name now. Who's the guy that's the brainchild behind? Oh my God, I've had too many scotches tonight.
Sorry, I'm almost done with this bottle of wine myself.
And the Orville. The Orville is like Star Trek meets Family Guy. It's funny, it's witty, it's smart, it takes on challenging topics, and it's really funny.
Oh yeah, I'm definitely gonna watch this.
You need to. It's really great. He actually plays a part in it, and it's just great all the way around. Lighthearted and fun, but heavy when it needs to be. It's a little bit like Brooklyn Nine-Nine in the sense that, have you ever watched that, by the way?
Oh yeah.
Brooklyn Nine-Nine is, I mean, Andy Samberg's fucking genius. So great.
Yeah, it's the best show I've seen him in by far.
He's so great. I mean, that's like know it all. Anyway, long story short, The Orville is a really great, fun show, and super lighthearted, but heavy when it needs to be. And they have this one episode where they land on this planet, and the planet is 100% direct democracy. And everybody wears these little badges on their chest that click whether you're liked or not.
Okay.
So let's say you go to Starbucks and you're rude to the barista, they can give you a thumbs down and your score goes down.
It's like a Black Mirror episode too.
Okay, so there's a Black Mirror. Okay, I don't watch Black Mirror. But anyway, so long story short, like they find themselves in this position where they're getting more thumbs down than thumbs up, and they're either gonna be lobotomized, where they like mess up their brain and they're basically robots, or they're gonna be able to continue to live their lives, and it's all based. They're like, oh, okay, and then their numbers start to go up, and then they show a video of them like twerking on a statue of the planet's most reverend person, and they're like, oh, all of a sudden you go down, and it's our grinding. Anyway, long story short, I keep saying that, but the gist of it is that this direct democracy can be a dangerous thing, and so going to take the time to really look at, is this local judge a worthwhile judge or not? Or are they just going to kind of go, they've been there for 3 or 4 terms, so they must be good. Let's keep them. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I mean, I don't really see why that doesn't happen now, especially on a local level. But I will say that when you're talking about on a national level, I think a lot of this hinges on the increase of technology. And I think the smaller and smaller this world becomes in a way that, like, cultures melt together. This is why you have, punk rockers all over the world. You have, this is why you have, girls that talk like Valley girls in Eastern Oregon, and you're like, oh, you just watch a bunch of Kardashians. Okay. But you see this slow melding of culture where it's slowly becoming, and at least what I think, where it doesn't matter if, I'm John the farmer over here, or I'm Caleb the cook over here in a city. What's going to end up happening is that our online personas and become with the internet and with the people around us in the world, you're going to see a slow move to where you don't have differences in culture necessarily based on where you live, right? So Caleb the cook in Portland, Oregon could be a, super conservative gun nut, okay? And, the quintessential of the in this farming town could be a, go by the pronouns they, them, zer, and, be this super, super progressive person that is on the furthest, I don't know, the furthest left of things you can be. It could be an entirely different person that wouldn't be necessarily stigmatized to where that person would be. I think you're already seeing this. I think it's going to be even more and more prevalent in the future.
That, right?
Yeah. I already see that. But I'm saying it's going to be more and more prevalent to the point where what state you live in, your direct region, is going to matter less and less and less and less to representative government in that way.
Okay, I understand that.
Because, and the argument against direct democracy is that, the states are going to have different views. I don't think the states are going to matter in what your personal views are in the future. I just don't. Once you have computers that can either attach to or go into, implanted into our brains. I'm not saying necessarily, well, no offense, Dad, but definitely not in your lifetime, but probably not in mine either.
Hey, now.
Who knows? They could invent like an anti-aging thing. That'd be cool. Or it wouldn't. I don't know. But
you just drink enough Percolati and you feel good.
Right?
Lasts forever.
But yeah, so the argument against direct democracy seems to dwindle where I see the future going, and where I think a lot of scientists, etc.
And to be honest with you, the idea of direct democracy lines pretty well with the idea of individual liberty.
Mm-hmm.
The struggle I have is when the 51% now becomes the ruling majority, and the 49% have to live with that. And that's where, I think, so I think that in the world.
Yeah.
Right. So like one state in America is as much as the third largest economy in the world. And we are basically and I think that's good. And I think that, if you were to take a governmental system like you're talking about, and if you were to limit it to 50 individual states, and each state was governed in that manner, what you would find is that you would have over time, you would have a homogenizing effect in which people began to gravitate towards states that thought like they thought. So you'd end up with a state that was very X, and a state that was very Y, and a state that was very Z. And so people who jive with California would move to California. People who jive with Arizona would move to Arizona. People who, jive with whatever state. And I think what you would end up with is very localized or community-based understanding of how we want to live as people. So, someone may say, hey, I'm against abortion. I'm against smoking. I'm very religious. I want to make sure that nobody does anything that's against the biblical rules. Well, all those liberties, and I want to party my ass off and do whatever I want to do. Those people might end up in Florida, for all we know. I want to own tigers and shit. Who knows? But the whole point being that you would have some dispersion, I guess, if you will, of the government control, and you'd end up with less federalism and more state government control.
Yeah, and like I get that in general, but the issue I come up with. So, like I said, if I was gonna have it a certain way, like, hey, tomorrow we got to do something, right? I would honestly, and sorry, for less and less and less and less, and I just don't see, even if we switch to a more state-run society now, how I just agree with Marx and Engels that the communist society is the inevitable of what will happen. Otherwise, the inevitable what will happen the opposite way is some sort of tyranny or anarchy. And so you have to go one of the way where I differ a lot with Marx and Engels and stuff is the idea of the craftsman, is the best way forward in with taking into account technology and the slow loss of jobs, because Marx is talking about the slow loss of and we have to keep in mind the time frame of this is even before the Bolshevik Revolution. Like those guys couldn't have seen this technological advances coming right around the corner. And so what they saw was the loss of the craftsman in place of the factory worker. And what they were saying was to try and go back to a craftsman-based society where you have unions that work in concert so that you guys can all collectively sell your goods in a similar way of how like a corporation would hire a bunch of people, right? It's this general idea. And I think the general idea is good, but the implication is wrong. I don't think you're going to have a resurgence of the craftsmen. I think you will a little bit, right? You still have artistic people, and people need their artistic ways to go about doing their thing. But like I said in my opening statement, with the loss of jobs, and I'm including programmers, eventually you're going to come up with a program that can program whatever the fuck you put into it, in theory. And once you have AI, if that happens, which I think it will, maybe not in our lifetime, but a computer in your brain so that you can process just as fast, but then now have the human intuition and navigate through these things. I think humans are just going to be needing of these things, because no one's going to have a job. You're not going to have, because someone already programmed a thing to fix everything and do the robot. So, boom, you only need the guy that's above that. You're going to have a massive loss of jobs across the world. I mean, think every single grocery store, you're going to end up with dystopia. And I'd rather the dystopia be held where the dude goes around taking people's organs because the air is so polluted and the water is so polluted that you can buy organs. But they have like cereal. Hannah would kill me for not remembering this because we watched it a couple times. But essentially, it's this big multiple live, because everything's so polluted, etc. You have to buy organs, and like injects you so you can't move, and takes your organ out and leaves you to die because you didn't pay up. And so and then they go back and they take that and they clean it up and they sell it to the next person, right? That's the kind of like evil, scary, dystopian thing that and not that exactly. And I'd rather have something where the people are cared for and the people are actually looked after. And again, we're talking about utopia theory, right? So
right,
yeah.
So I'm down at 5% battery. So important things to note is that we're looking for the same thing. I think it sounds like it's just two different ways of going about it, and two different places that you lay your trust. Two different areas where you lay your trust, and the concern with corporations as they stand today. But the flip side of that is, what is a corporation? In theory, a corporation is a number of individuals who figure out or decide to join together to build a business. And so maybe the idea of a corporation needs to change in order for us to make sure that in a libertarian society, that corporations can't be what they are feared. I don't really trust that government always has my best interest in mind. In my estimation, most politicians are only looking to figure out how they can get voted again next time. And you pointed out, and I never went back and watched it, so I apologize for that. But you pointed out something I thought was interesting, that, when it came to this $2 trillion bailout for COVID, that, every senator had an option to stand up for a minute and say something. And so they would stand up they were saying, if I don't vote for this, it's my political career, so I'm going to go vote for it. But even though I don't agree with it, so I'm going to stand up and say I don't agree with it, and then I'm going to go vote for it.
Yeah.
And I guess that's a perfect example of why I don't trust government to do this kind of stuff. And without some kind of severe, now if you made crazy limitations on term limits and you said, hey, no matter what, those things are great, but the other thing you got to remember is you may lose a lot of institutional knowledge by doing that. And so then there's if every 4 years you're changing 90% of the government, now you've got some pretty serious learning curve to try to get everybody up to speed. So it's like every 4th year you have a down year.
Yeah, I think
for these guys to figure that, pull their heads out of their ass and get up to speed. Now we can go back to
what we're looking for is the ideals behind the implementation of what we're talking. I finished the bottle, by the way, in case you wanted to know why I'm fumbling everything. But the implementation of what would differ on. And so, for instance, there's so many different, there's this funny meme page that I follow, and they take it too far sometimes, but it's supposed to be funny memes, called Dank Leftist Memes on Netflix, or on Instagram, excuse me. But they have memes consistently about libertarians and anarcho-capitalists, which is anarcho-capitalist is just libertarian on steroids. But making fun of these ideas and stuff like that. But to be fair, they're the only ones that they aren't being brutal to. They're not calling them morons like that. And reading about libertarianism is because it is from a place that's also good.
Yeah,
it's a good-hearted place to be at. It's just two different ways of trying to go about that. So, and like I said, the big core things that I'd say we agree on is, it's just like you said, different implementation is, like I said in the opening thing, talking to Puerto Rico and being like, okay, cool. So, you're a territory, quote unquote. Okay, so here we're gonna go. You guys hold a vote. If you want to be in, you're in. If you want to be out, you're out. It's up to you. You do your thing.
Yeah, make your choice. Let's go.
Make your choice. Let's go. Are you in or are you out? Yeah. And then also, like I said, pulling out of all these foreign conflicts and then being like, okay, what's actually important to defense? How far do we need to actually be involved? and stop being the world's police force.
Right, absolutely. And if you look at the Libertarian Party platform, you will see that's very much at the forefront of foreign policy for libertarians. We need to have a force big enough to defend ourselves, and other than that, stay the hell out of other people's property or other people's issues and to be in. And that's one of the struggles that we have. Do you turn the other cheek, or do you turn the other way when some government, some terrible government's doing some terrible thing? The answer might be yes, just based on the fact that it's not our place to impose our will upon other people. So
yeah, I mean,
don't
like that's kind of how I feel with, like, not only when you're talking about the Middle East, where like it is like, oh man, you got some really shitty, horrible governments. Non-argumentatively, they're bad. But then you also have things like with, at least with the current system, which again is pro the foreign policy of most on the left and most libertarians. I say on the left as like leftists, so socialists in general, where you have that togetherness also is on, like, for instance, things like Venezuelan socialist ideals, where you have a socialist government takeover, and then you have the CIA and the U.S. Coming in and being like literally out in the open of the day of the internet age, whether you think it's for good or bad, going into someone else's country and being like, hey, you know what? Actually, this is the president that we chose for you based on the people that like us in your country. Oh, so now there's two presidents, and oh, we're just gonna blame everything on your other president, and like just completely and fully involve yourself in someone else's fucking affairs. And it's like, no. And that's why I wrote down in capital letters and made sure to say is that the eventual globalization that I'm talking about would not be forced. I think it would be inevitable. I think it would be something that eventually countries are going to go like, shit, yeah, that sounds good. Let's vote in. Do we want to go? Cool. Will you have us? Oh, perfect. Let's do this shit together, you know? And so I'm not talking about like a totalitarian communist would say, like, forced globalism. I'm not saying that. I think it would be inevitable.
Well, and obviously it may be inevitable, and only time will tell. And we'll just have to, have earnest debates and conversations. I'm about to die here.
That's all right. My bladder is about to explode.
Well, hopefully we entertain the masses for the last hour and 50 minutes.
Yeah, hopefully. I hope it was entertaining. I think it was. I had a good time.
I had a good time. That's all that really matters, right? Is that we enjoy ourselves.
Exactly. We don't give a fuck about any of you listening. We just want to... We're just so big-headed that we just need to put our opinion out in the world.
Right. I just got to tell everyone what I think no matter what.
Exactly. All right, dude. I'll let you go. I love you.
Right.
Thanks for coming on.
Thanks, buddy. Appreciate you.
Yeah, and fuck you.
Yeah, fuck you back.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
All right. Yeah, it's conversations like that, which is why I kind of wanted to have. It says, as the law of the land on any of these concepts. Don't think, oh, all socialists think this way, or oh, all libertarians. What you think. Even if you think that you're pretty headstrong into what your views are, I encourage you, with all this time most of us have, to go out and really think about what you believe in, and think, is this really what I need? Is this really what I really, really believe is? Challenge yourself. Look up the other side of the argument. Try and poke holes in it. Look at your side of the argument. Try to poke holes in it. And look at sides of the argument you never even thought of listening to. Just listen to everyone and come up with your own opinions, your own thoughts. You have the fucking time. Don't tell me you don't have the time. Unless you're a nurse, God bless you. Unless you're a cop, God bless you. It's times like this that we need you guys. But if you're not falling into one of those categories and you're at home sitting around like a couch potato, look up some philosophy and politics that are not your own and really, really dig into it. I guarantee you will have a blast. Yeah. Anyways, deuces.